TIAN X Science is where science meets the unknown. And my name's TIAN. I'm from China.
If a place has not seen sunlight for 5.5 million years, could life still exist inside it? The answer might be more incredible than you can imagine. Among the caves explored by humanity, there are certain discoveries that remain entirely unexplained to this day. Caves have always been one of humanity's oldest fears. Perhaps since ancient times, humans have been terrified of the unknown entities hiding in the subterranean darkness. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors sought refuge in caves to escape fierce beasts and severe weather. Yet even then, they knew that not all caves were meant to be entered, because they understood that once you stepped into certain places, you might never return. In the mythology of almost every civilization around the world, the underground realm is inherently linked to death, monsters, and unknown powers. The ancient Greeks believed the domain of Hades was located beneath the earth. Norse mythology suggested that Nidhogg, the giant serpent gnawing at the roots of the world tree, lurked in the subterranean depths. Meanwhile, some indigenous legends from South America speak of caves leading to an underground world, where time flows entirely differently than it does in our reality. Today we are accustomed to treating these stories as mere myths, viewing them as the ancients' imaginative response to darkness and the unknown. But the real question is, what if there is actually some factual basis hidden behind these legends? The mainstream scientific explanation for caves is actually quite straightforward. To geologists, they are simply cavities formed by water-eroding rock over millions of years. To biologists, they are highly specialized ecosystems inhabited by blind fish, white beetles, and various other organisms perfectly adapted to pitch-black environments. And to tourists, they are merely attraction sites featuring stalactites and light shows, seemingly devoid of any profound mystery. However, to speleologists, the reality is entirely different. Those who spend extensive periods deep underground know that certain phenomena simply do not align with textbook explanations. There are discoveries with unidentifiable origins, traces that defy logical explanation, and things that frankly should not be there in the first place. Sometimes, even the most seasoned explorers experience a chilling sensation down their spines. Today, we are going to examine 5 cave discoveries that remain incompletely explained by modern science. The very first discovery was extraordinary right from the start. In 1986, near the Black Sea coast in Romania, a construction team conducting geological surveys for a future power plant accidentally uncovered the entrance to a subterranean cave. When the first wave of explorers descended into the depths, they immediately realized they had not found an ordinary cavern. This place was completely sealed off from the outside world. There were no fissures, no connecting passages, and absolutely no surface air flowing in. Scientists estimated that this cave, known as Mobile Cave, had been isolated from the external environment for approximately 5.5 million years. When it was originally sealed, modern humans did not even exist. Our ancient ancestors were just beginning to learn how to walk on 2 feet in Africa. Even more bizarre was the fact that the air inside was practically toxic. The oxygen content in the cave was only about 1/5 of that on the surface, while the concentrations of hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide were astonishingly high. Without professional breathing equipment, a human would lose consciousness within minutes in such an environment. Based on standard biological consensus at the time, scientists initially assumed it was impossible for life to exist here. With no sunlight, negligible oxygen, and an atmosphere thick with toxic gases, this environment theoretically should have been a dead zone. Yet as they ventured deeper, the sight before them completely overturned biological paradigms. The cave was absolutely teeming with life. Dozens of creatures found nowhere else on Earth were thriving in this abyss. There were blind water leeches that did not suck blood but instead actively hunted other animals. There were water scorpions living in pools highly enriched with sulfides. There were also bizarre worms and unique arthropods. Ultimately, Scientists identified over 50 species in this ecosystem, 35 of which had never before been recorded by science. These creatures had never seen the sun in their entire existence. They did not breathe normal air, and they lived in an environment that would instantly kill the vast majority of surface-dwelling organisms. Yet they were not just surviving, they were successfully reproducing. On the surface, almost all life ultimately depends on the sun. Plants absorb sunlight, animals eat the plants, and predators hunt those animals. Without the sun, the entire food chain collapses. But inside Mobile Cave, where sunlight had not penetrated for 5 million years, the foundation of the food chain was not plant life. Instead, it was a type of bacteria that fed on hydrogen sulfide and other chemical compounds. They were not consuming sunlight, but rather metabolizing rock and toxic gases. And the entire ecosystem was built entirely upon these bacteria. Scientists refer to this process as chemosynthesis. Before the discovery of Mobile Cave, it was widely believed that such ecosystems only existed in the deep ocean near volcanic hydrothermal vents. No one ever anticipated that a complete and highly complex ecosystem could form within an isolated subterranean world. It had predators, prey, a fully functioning food chain, and it had sustained itself independently for millions of years. Even today, scientists cannot fully explain this phenomenon. Where exactly does the enormous energy required to support such rich biodiversity come from? How did these organisms manage to evolve in a completely dark and absolutely isolated environment? What is even stranger is that some of these species closely resemble organisms that went extinct on the surface millions of years ago, almost as if they had been completely forgotten by time. One biologist involved in the Mobile Cave research recalled that when he first saw the cave spiders, he was absolutely stunned. They were completely snow-white, their eyes had totally degenerated, and their legs were disproportionately long. At that moment, he felt as though he was looking at alien life forms rather than terrestrial biology. This is not an exaggeration. These creatures were so fundamentally different from everything he knew that he momentarily doubted whether he was still standing on Earth. But the question that truly keeps scientists whispering among themselves to this day is something far more profound. If life can exist and thrive in an environment like this, devoid of sunlight, lacking oxygen, completely cut off from the surface world, and surviving solely on the chemical energy derived from hydrogen sulfide and rock, then on what basis do we assert that life does not exist on other planets? Mars has extensive underground cavern systems. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn hide vast liquid oceans beneath their icy crusts. The environments there are certainly different from Earth. However, the discovery of Mobile Cave makes it increasingly difficult for scientists to confidently declare that life cannot exist without sunlight and oxygen. The facts have already proven that life is not only capable of adapting to extreme environments, but it is also far more resilient and incredibly more creative than we ever imagined. The second discovery comes from Nassereith Cave in Austria. This story began in 2014 when a cave exploration team was surveying an obscure subterranean system in the Alps. Locals had actually known about the existence of Nassereith Cave for a long time, but virtually no one had ever ventured deep inside. The entrance is extremely narrow, and the internal passages are complex and highly dangerous. What makes it even more eerie is that local residents frequently claimed to hear strange sounds echoing from the depths of the cave. The noise was described as a cross between a low moan and a continuous hum. However, when the expedition team struggled through a restricted passage and entered a massive subterranean hall about 100 meters below the surface, they saw something entirely unexpected. The cave walls were covered with an extensive array of patterns. These were not random scratches or natural geological formations. They were actual paintings, animals, geometric shapes, and various bizarre symbols, painted in red and black pigments, were densely distributed across the rock face. Discovering cave art is not inherently sensational, as Europe is home to numerous famous prehistoric cave art sites. But the murals in Nassereith Cave were distinctly different. These images depicted animals that do not belong in Europe. There were large felines with abnormally massive fangs, and a bizarre creature that looked like a giraffe, but had a short neck and incredibly thick limbs. The most unsettling image of all was a figure researchers dubbed the horned human. It possessed a human body, but its head featured an intricate and massive branching horned crown. The antlers looked nothing like those of a deer or an elk. The proportions were entirely off. The horns branched outward and then curved sharply forward, resembling an elaborate crown or a battle helmet. When researchers analyzed the pigments, the results shocked the scientific community once again. The age of these murals was far older than anyone had anticipated, predating even the famous Lascaux cave paintings in France. Yet the real mystery keeping scientists awake was not the timeline, but the pigment itself. The paint contained a specific mineral composition that simply does not exist in the local region. The closest known deposit of this mineral is hundreds of kilometers away. This implies that the individuals who created these paintings either traveled hundreds of kilometers specifically to acquire this pigment, or they possessed a highly sophisticated cross-regional trade network. According to mainstream archaeological understanding, such a massive exchange network should not have existed during that era. However, the biggest headache for researchers was not the animal depictions, but the mysterious symbols placed adjacent to the murals. There were rows of dots, precise lines, and arrangements that clearly followed an intentional pattern. These designs were not merely decorative because they exhibited a distinct structural logic. Some researchers hypothesized that this was a technical system, perhaps used for tracking days, counting prey, or recording information that we have long lost the ability to comprehend. Naturally, these are only educated guesses. Other scholars proposed an alternative explanation, suggesting that these dotted symbols might represent a primitive calendar system, as certain combinations of dots seem to correspond mathematically with lunar cycles. Even more fascinating, an invited paleographer noted that the arrangement of these symbols bore a striking resemblance to early proto-writing. This means they might not be simple drawings, but actual recorded data. If this hypothesis holds true, the timeline for when humanity first began using symbols to record complex thoughts might be pushed back thousands of years earlier than what mainstream archaeology currently accepts. This would fundamentally alter our understanding of human cognitive evolution. Eventually, this cave was classified as a restricted zone, and access became strictly controlled. Research is still ongoing, but the findings are consistently released in a highly cautious and piecemeal manner, almost as if someone prefers that not too many people know about the horned human hiding in the Austrian Alps. Moving away from Austria, the third discovery takes us to Vietnam. This country is home to one of the largest cave systems in the world, Son Doong Cave. It is so utterly massive that it contains its own localized weather system, complete with clouds, underground rivers, and even a pristine subterranean jungle. The main passage reaches heights of 200 meters, and certain sections are large enough to comfortably enclose a multi-story skyscraper. Local residents originally discovered the cave back in 1991, but systematic scientific exploration did not officially begin until 2009. Since then, almost every expedition has brought back an entirely new mystery. In 2019, an expedition team entered a branch cave that was previously considered a dead end. Behind a collapsed pile of rubble, they found a hidden passage descending hundreds of meters deeper into the earth. As soon as they entered the corridor, the team members sensed a distinct anomaly. The air grew significantly warmer, the humidity spiked dramatically, and a faint, sweet scent permeated the atmosphere. Nobody could quite identify what the scent was. As they followed the passage forward, they arrived at an enormous subterranean cavern. The floor of this chamber was covered in a thick layer of a white substance. From a distance, it looked as though fine flour had been spread across the entire ground. Initially, Everyone assumed it was just fine sand or some form of mineral deposit until one of the explorers stepped on it. The material beneath his foot actually reacted. It compressed slightly under his weight and then slowly rebounded to its original shape, behaving almost exactly like memory foam. The only problem was that this was definitely not foam. Laboratory analysis of the samples revealed that this was an immense biological colony comprised entirely of microorganisms. It could be a fungus, or perhaps a completely novel life form analogous to a fungus. Together, they formed a continuous living carpet that reached 1/2 meter thick in its deepest sections. The biologists tasked with analyzing the sample were completely stumped. This organism did not match any known species on record. Its cellular structure could not even be slotted into existing biological classification systems. It did not behave quite like a fungus. It wasn't exactly bacteria, and it wasn't an algae. Instead, it appeared to be a transitional life form existing somewhere between the three. As one microbiologist accurately described it, it was as if evolution had chosen an entirely different divergent path down there in the dark. But the true shock was yet to come. Researchers discovered that this organism appeared capable of sensing human presence. When the team entered the cavern, the white carpet by their feet began to emit a very faint glow. It was a pale blue bioluminescence, flickering gently in the absolute darkness, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. When the team members stood perfectly still, the light would slowly fade away. But the moment they began to move, the luminescence would immediately intensify. It was as if this biological carpet could sense the micro-vibrations caused by their footsteps, or perhaps it could detect minute changes in air pressure. The scientific community is obviously well acquainted with bioluminescence. Fireflies glow, deep-sea fish emit light, and certain fungi are known to be bioluminescent. However, a light-emitting biological entity that actively reacts to physical movement has never been formally documented in scientific literature. Researchers conducted extensive experiments. They threw stones at the ground, but there was no reaction. They splashed water, yet still nothing happened. However, the moment someone took a single step, a soft ring of blue light would materialize around their feet, gently expanding outward before slowly fading away a few seconds later. One cautious scientist proposed that this might be a primitive form of communication. Another suggested it could be a defense mechanism. Some even speculated that it was not sensing vibrations at all, but rather the body heat radiating from the explorers, or perhaps the carbon dioxide they exhaled. To this day, no single explanation can answer all the questions. If this place is engulfed in absolute darkness all year round, exactly who is it trying to communicate with? And who does it need to defend against? Deep underground, it has no natural predators and no competitors. Aside from a few insects and bacteria, there is practically no other life. So why would an organism that has evolved in total darkness for millions of years need to emit light? More importantly, why does it specifically react to creatures of our size and temperature? These questions remain unanswered. Samples have been sent to multiple laboratories around the world, but the complete biological classification of this organism remains unfinished, and research progress is incredibly slow because it can barely survive outside the cave. That mysterious white carpet is now strictly off-limits to tourists. Researchers fear that human intrusion might destroy this entirely unique subterranean ecosystem. The fourth discovery comes from Krubera Cave in the Abkhazia region. It was once known as the deepest cave in the world, or at least it held that title until very recently. Its total depth exceeds 2 kilometers. Reaching the very bottom requires several consecutive days of navigating tight passages, subterranean rivers, and vertical shafts. Even for professional cave explorers, it is an extreme physical and mental challenge. Since the last century, people have constantly broken depth records here. But on one particular expedition, what the team brought back was not a new record, but a mystery that remains logically unexplained to this day. Inside a branch passage at a depth of approximately 1,500 meters, the expedition team discovered a highly unusual cavern. The first thing that caught their attention was the floor. It was exceptionally flat. This was not the smooth surface typically formed by continuous water erosion. That kind of geological wear is quite common, as thousands of years of water flow can indeed polish rock until it resembles glass. But this was entirely different. The entire floor was so flat that it looked unnatural. There were no ripples, no fissures, and no signs of erosion. It looked exactly as if someone had poured a layer of liquid material over the ground and let it slowly solidify. When samples were sent for analysis, the results revealed that the substance covering the surface had a composition remarkably similar to obsidian, a type of volcanic glass. The problem, however, is that absolutely no volcanic activity exists in this region. The nearest dormant volcano is hundreds of kilometers away. So why would materials resembling volcanic glass appear 500 meters underground? No one could explain it. But that was only the beginning. The researchers then noticed strange grooves on the walls of the cavern. They were smooth, perfectly parallel, and about 1 centimeter deep. They extended horizontally around the entire perimeter of the chamber, roughly 1.5 meters above the ground. It looked as if something had scraped along the walls, or as if someone had used a giant comb to carve a perfectly neat row of tracks. What is even more bizarre is that the spacing between these grooves was almost perfectly identical, maintaining a consistent distance of about 4 centimeters. Geologists quickly ruled out natural formation. Flowing water does not leave marks like this. There is no wind erosion at such extreme depths, and tectonic movements create jagged fissures, not meticulously arranged parallel grooves. A speleologist with a background in biology noticed a highly unsettling detail. The distance between these grooves closely matched the spacing of claw marks left by certain large predatory animals. But the glaring question was, what kind of predator could possibly survive in a subterranean world 1,500 meters deep? There is no sunlight, no obvious food source, and it is almost entirely cut off from the outside world. To find answers, the research team installed automated cameras inside the cavern. The equipment featured infrared night vision and motion sensors. They then left the area. 3 months later, when the researchers returned and reviewed the footage, the vast majority of the video was exactly as expected: dark, silent, and completely empty. However, in a clip recorded during the 6th week, the motion sensor was suddenly triggered. The camera automatically activated, recording for a mere 4 seconds. In the frame, a massive pale object rapidly swept across the field of view. It moved incredibly fast, staying low to the ground. Because the infrared camera had a low frame rate, the entire image was highly blurred, making it almost impossible to discern any specific details. But one thing was absolutely certain. It was not a falling rock, it was not flowing water, and it was not an optical illusion caused by light and shadow. Something was moving down there, 1,500 meters below the surface. When this footage was handed over to zoologists for analysis, opinions immediately splintered. Some argued it might be a giant bat, but the flaw in that theory is that giant bats have never been discovered at such extreme depths. Others guessed it might be a badger, or another surface animal that accidentally wandered in. But the speleologists on the expedition quickly shot down that hypothesis. It took them days of grueling effort to reach that location. Along the way, they had to squeeze through passages barely wide enough for a human. Some sections required crawling on their stomachs, others demanded ropes to rappel down vertical drops, and certain areas were perpetually submerged under groundwater. It is physically impossible for any terrestrial animal the size of a dog to reach that depth on its own. This leads to a chilling new question. What if it did not come from the surface? What if it actually lives down there, living 1,500 meters underground, in perpetual darkness, at a temperature of around 5 degrees Celsius? What does it eat? How does it reproduce? And exactly how many of them are there? To this day, these questions remain unanswered. The footage is still undergoing rigorous analysis, but official channels have yet to provide a definitive explanation. Later, the research team installed camera equipment once again. This time, the sensors captured no anomalous footage. However, the team members working in the cavern reported another bizarre phenomenon. They started hearing a sound emanating from the deep darkness. It was not the sound of dripping water, nor the sound of cracking rock, and it did not resemble the call of any known animal. It sounded more like slow, heavy breathing, inhale, exhale, echoing rhythmically from the subterranean depths. Scientists maintain the explanation that it is merely airflow. Air rushing through narrow passages can indeed produce all sorts of strange noises, which is not an uncommon occurrence. But those who heard it with their own ears later confessed that when you are standing all alone in the pitch-black darkness 5,500 meters underground, it is incredibly difficult to convince yourself that the sound is just the wind. The fifth discovery comes from Taylor Cave in Alaska. This cave is located in a remote area of southeastern Alaska, situated right within the permafrost zone. In 2007, a melting glacier exposed a rocky outcrop, bringing a cave entrance that had been hidden beneath thick ice for ages back into the light of day. In 2008, the first expedition team entered the cavern. As it turned out, it was not a particularly massive cave, measuring only about 300 meters in total length. However, what they found deep inside caused a massive sensation in the paleontology community. In a freezing chamber at the very end of the cave, researchers discovered animal remains locked away in the permafrost. Finding ancient animals preserved in permafrost is not uncommon. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, and ancient horses have all been preserved in this exact manner. The truly bizarre aspect is that what they found this time did not belong to any known species. The chamber preserved 3 nearly intact skeletons. They were lying side by side, looking as though they had fallen asleep and simply never woke up. In terms of size, they fell somewhere between a large dog and a small bear, but their skeletal structure was exceedingly grotesque. The forelimbs were significantly longer than the hind limbs, presenting proportions somewhat reminiscent of a gorilla. The skulls were elongated, featuring abnormally developed jaws and enormous eye sockets. Their teeth did not resemble those of a strict carnivore, nor did they look like those of a typical herbivore. They appeared more like the teeth of an omnivore, yet simultaneously possessed exceptionally long canine teeth. The paleontologists involved in the research could not classify them into any known family or genus. They were not bears, not wolves, not wolverines, and not the extinct short-faced bears. Whether looking at proportions or structural anatomy, nothing matched any known living or fossilized species. One expert even stated that if he had not physically held the bones in his own hands, he would have suspected the entire thing was a massive hoax. But the undeniable problem is that they are entirely real. Radiocarbon dating results indicated that these skeletons are approximately 4,000 years old. During that era, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and various megafauna were still roaming Alaska. Yet, these particular creatures have never appeared in any known paleontological record. And the most unsettling detail is not the creatures themselves, but the exact manner in which they were discovered. The 3 skeletons were arranged in a perfect semicircle, with all their heads pointing directly toward the center. And right in the middle of that semicircle sat a flat stone slab. The slab was too perfectly level, so smooth that it defied natural formation. Even stranger, there were dark residue marks left on its surface. Subsequent analysis revealed that it was soot mixed with animal fat. It looked exactly as if something had been deliberately burned on that stone slab. Scattered around the slab were tiny bone fragments, many of which had been intentionally sharpened at one end. Some were crafted so finely they resembled needles. They looked remarkably like primitive tools. But the glaring issue is that, according to mainstream scientific consensus, only humans and certain higher primates possess the cognitive ability to manufacture tools, and these skeletons clearly do not belong to any primate. They share absolutely zero common anatomical traits with humans or apes. They have an entirely different body structure, entirely different proportions, and an entirely different mode of locomotion. This appears to be a biological entity that has never graced the pages of any biology textbook. Many theories later emerged regarding their identity. Some argue that this might be an unknown bear species with highly anomalous anatomical traits. Others suggest they belong to a long-extinct lineage of predators that developed the most rudimentary tool using capabilities while coexisting with early humans. One remarkably bold zoologist even proposed an alternative hypothesis. He theorized that this might be a species that had embarked on the evolutionary path toward higher intelligence, but ultimately went extinct before truly developing a civilization, essentially a failed competitor to humanity. Naturally, the mainstream academic community does not support this radical view, but equally, no one has been able to provide a more convincing explanation. Later, when the news inevitably leaked to the media, hordes of journalists and cryptozoology enthusiasts flocked to Alaska. Authorities quickly restricted access to the cave, citing the need to protect an active research site. The skeletons were subsequently relocated to a secure laboratory for preservation. And to this day, a comprehensive scientific description of this species has never been published. 18 years have passed, and those 3 frozen skeletons from Alaska remain one of the most bizarre and least-known mysteries in the field of paleontology. Those are the 5 stories. 5 caves across 5 distinct locations: Romania, Austria, Vietnam, Abkhazia, and Alaska. They share absolutely no commonalities. They exist in different geological environments, have different climate conditions, and stem from different historical backgrounds. Yet they all conceal certain things that remain incompletely explained to this day. An ecosystem that has operated independently for 5.5 million years in an environment totally devoid of sunlight. Symbols that are older than known cave art, potentially representing recorded data. A mysterious life form that emits light and actively reacts to human presence. An unidentified silhouette captured on camera 1,500 meters underground. And the skeletons of an unknown biological entity that might have used tools and even mastered fire. Taken individually, each discovery is enough to ignite fierce scientific debate. But when viewed together, they form a rather unsettling picture. We constantly assume that we fully understand this planet. We draw maps, measure the highest mountains, scan the ocean floors, and even send rovers to Mars. But right beneath our feet, just dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of meters underground, there still exists a world about which we know practically nothing. Caves riddle the Earth's crust. Their total length can stretch for hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and the vast majority of them have never been touched by human presence. We do not even know where most of them are. What else is hiding down there? In those labyrinthine passages that have never seen a single ray of sunlight, what kind of creatures are prowling in the dark? What forms of life have been evolving in absolute isolation for millions of years, entirely oblivious to the existence of humanity, just as we have been entirely oblivious to theirs? How many traces of the ancient past are still waiting silently within sealed subterranean chambers? No one truly knows. Perhaps there are some answers we do not genuinely want to discover. Because caves have never been merely empty voids in the rock. They are more like the retained memories of the Earth itself. And it seems the Earth is still guarding many profound secrets that we are simply not yet ready to face. Ultimately, these subterranean mysteries do much more than just send a shiver down our spines. They offer us a profound and necessary lesson in humility. In an age where we hold the sum of human knowledge in our pockets, it is remarkably easy to become arrogant, to believe that we have mapped every inch of reality and completely conquered the natural world. But the Earth, in its silent and ancient wisdom, constantly reminds us that we are still just beginners on this planet. The true value of science is not about proudly claiming we have all the answers. Instead, It is about having the courage to face the unknown with an open mind, maintaining a sense of awe, and realizing that the boundaries of our knowledge are meant to be pushed. Nature will always be our greatest and most unpredictable teacher. These caves teach us that life is far more resilient, and history is far more complex than our textbooks could ever capture. But now, I want to turn the spotlight over to you. Everything I have shared today on TNX Science is a synthesis of my own research and personal analysis. Because it is my own perspective, it could be entirely right, or it could be completely wrong. What do you think about these 5 incredible discoveries? Do you believe these are genuine biological anomalies and lost chapters of evolutionary history? Or do you think there is a simpler, more logical explanation that we are simply missing? True or false, fact or fiction? I truly value your perspectives, so please drop your thoughts down below so we can dissect and discuss these mysteries together. And before you dive into the discussion, I have a quick question for you. Where in the world are you watching this video from right now? Whether you are sitting in a brightly lit, bustling city or out near the quiet, dark mountains, remember that we are all standing on the crust of the exact same deeply mysterious planet. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I will be waiting for you down in the comment section. Stay curious, respect the unknown, and I will see you in the next episode.